Gurudev ki jai. Shriman Mahaprabhu ki jai. Shri Sadbuch Gauranga ki jai. Shri Harinam Prabhu ki jai. Tirubhav Mahotsav Titi. Shri Srila Gopal Bhatta Goswami Mahasaya ki jai. Shri Chaitanya Dham ki jai. Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki jai. Gaur Praman Hari Gaur. So, good evening to all of you. Pranam, more than welcome. Also to the ones today connected online from different Okay. So, we are continuing with a series of lectures that we started today in the morning. I know that some of you have come just some hours ago, so I will share some brief recap of what we saw today in the morning, which is part of a bigger series of lectures under the auspices of Brigopal Prabhu. He invited to speak about the contributions of the 6 Goswamis to Gaudiya Vaishnavism, which is a big topic, very big. So, and I know that maybe, as my Guru Maharaj used to say, some topics may sound too high for some, too low for others. Not all of you maybe are totally introduced to the reality of the 6 Goswamis, but even those who are totally introduced can always be further introduced. There's no end, bottomless ocean, so let's keep being introduced wherever we are. And so today in the morning we gave some introduction to the topic of the contribution of the 6 Goswamis to Gaudiya Vaishnavism, Gaudiya Sampradaya. And basically the conclusion we reached was that instead of speaking about the Goswamis contributing something to Gaudiya Vaishnavism, the Goswamis contributed Gaudiya Vaishnavism, basically, because you take the Goswamis out and there is no longer Gaudiya Vaishnavism. So they are Gaudiya Vaishnavism, Gaudiya Vedanta. They themselves are the contribution. They contribute things, but they themselves are a descending contribution, because in our perspective, the Goswamis are to be considered as ragatmikas or nityasiddhas. In other words, personalities who have made part for the eternal retinue of Bhagavan. So they just come to this world in the context of lila and blessing and contributing to the cause, to the eternal cause from where they are part from time without beginning, and coming here to invite us to take part in the divine drama of divine love. So also we mentioned, I'm making some brief recap. If you want, you can listen then to talk in further detail. But also if we have to speak about the contribution of the Goswamis, we need to speak about Mahaprabhu. Who is Mahaprabhu? What's Mahaprabhu about? Because the contribution of the Goswamis, so what the Goswamis are about, are totally intimately dependent and connected to who is Mahaprabhu. And of course, for that we need to speak who is Krishna and so on. And we share some ideas today in the morning about how Krishna for us, Gaudiyas, Braja Krishna in particular, is considered Swayam Bhagavan, or when the topmost face of the Absolute decide to cast away, you say, his dress of opulence, his suit, and just decides to walk carefree and barefoot into the topmost informality of Vrindavan. So that's already a high conception that we will see the Goswamis gave us, this conception of God beyond God. Because Krishna in Vrindavan he's still God somewhere else, but in Vrindavan he's something more than God, not something less, interestingly. But there's more to the story, because on top of that we have the conception of Sri Chaitanya Dev, which is in one sense higher than Krishna. Of course, he's Krishna himself in his most upgraded version, if you will, the most updated side of himself appears as Gauranga, like Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. He describes him in Chaitanya Charitamrita as Paratattva Simha. It's a very important expression. There's like the Swayam Bhagavan of Srimad Bhagavatam in relation to Krishna. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, Krishnadas Kaviraj will say, Angorang Krishna Swayam Bhagavan. Okay, we agree. Supreme Personality of Godhead in the words of Srila Prabhupada. But Mahaprabhu is Paratattva Simha, which means the ultimate limit of the absolute. So, as we say today, Krishna is Supreme Personality of Godhead, Mahaprabhu is Supreme Personality of Krishna. So, regarding what Mahaprabhu came to taste, of course, naturally we will continue with what Mahaprabhu came to give, because one thing is the consequence of the other. His giving is the overflowing of his relishing. Primaras niryas korite ashradam, raga marga bhakti lauki korite pracharam. Establishment of a raga marg, or the path of the passionate love that follows in the wake of the inhabitants of Raj. All this is just a byproduct of the personal agenda of God himself tasting something, but as we say today in the morning, his tasting is in such a way that everyone is always included and everyone is blessed in the equation. It's not that Krishna says, okay, I want to taste Radha Bhav, and that becomes a totally selfish project and nobody else is included there. He cannot but do the opposite because he's selfless by nature. So even if he says, I want to taste this personally, somehow that will include everyone else. So that's the result of Mahaprabhu's experience. And the Goswamis translating, as we mentioned, what Mahaprabhu is tasting. So it's God himself, in the words of my Guru Maharaj, in full existential crisis, wondering who he is, which are his own limits, and how to know himself from a new perspective, from the eyes of love, basically. And how to translate that to the world, basically. That's a big, huge task. So the Goswamis are instrumental in this. Mahaprabhu is the golden volcano of divine love, in the words of Srila Siddhar Maharaj. And the Goswamis are making that lava accessible in such a way that we may be consumed by that, but at the same time alive and well. So sounds paradoxical, and it is paradoxical. If you want to enter into the realm of mysticism, better you get accustomed with dealing with paradox and all this stuff. So in this way, for us, the Goswamis, we make this brief introduction, are really the most important, our superheroes, if you will. When you were a child, I saw that Brigopla has this, how do you call it? Phantom Man or something. So that's a version, okay, we can accept, but hopefully you have this type of people. Sometimes they are in the, how do you say, the hall of justice, how do you call it? Well, we have the great superheroes in the whole super hall of mercy, and these are the Goswamis. And the 6 Goswamis, the 6th extended arms of Mahaprabhu, another form of Sadbhuj, reaching us. Today we gave that idea. So for us, the Goswamis are super, super crucial, especially his writings, as we will speak these days. And although for us, Gaudiyas, the Srimad Bhagavatam is the topmost Praman, Amal Praman, the ultimate scriptural evidence and revelation, in one sense, the books of the Goswamis are even more important than the Srimad Bhagavatam. Why? Because actually our reading of Srimad Bhagavatam is through the lens of the Goswamis. And so many other lines go to the Bhagavatam and reach so many different conclusions. So the fact that we find certain things in the Bhagavatam is because the Goswamis found them first. And they are showing to us, Krishna Varnan to Sa Krishna, this is Mahaprabhu. I will say, of course, do not say that to Balavi or some, oh, they will say, that's Mahaprabhu, Balavacharya. So our reading of the Bhagavatam is totally filtered. And by this, I do not mean limited, but just nuanced, if you will, by the reading of the Goswami, by the tikas, the commentaries of the Goswamis, and by the other books of the Goswamis who are extensions of the Bhagavatam. So that's Gaudiya Sampradaya, basically. The Mahaprabhu embraced the Bhagavatam in a certain way, and the Goswamis translated that embrace. That's Gaudiya Vedanta. Goswamis translating Mahaprabhu's embrace to the Bhagavatam. Sorry if I'm becoming too poetic. We have to. It's unavoidable what to do. So in this way, through their books, the Goswamis kind of systematized the ecstasy that Mahaprabhu was about. You have, I don't know, you go to the Sri Sampradaya and you have the main systematizer, that's the word, of the Sampradaya was Ramanuja. And to the point that the Sampradaya sometimes is called Ramanuja Sampradaya. Similarly, in the Brahma Sampradaya, you have Madhva as main systematizer, and you know it as Madhva Sampradaya. So I will say that in our particular Sampradaya, which is begun by Mahaprabhu once, the Goswamis are the ones who are doing this systematizing and establishing the scriptural canon and the Bhakti Shastras, what we may call the Bhakti Shastras for us. So that's a particular view that we take on the Bhagavatam, on the scripture, and sometimes we call it Gaudiya Darshan. Darshan means to see, or basically to see through certain lens that are seeing us, if you will, revelation. So that's Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Again, Gaudiya Goswamis came to give what Mahaprabhu came to give. There are other forms of Vaishnavism, but we are interested in Gaudiya Vaishnavism. I mean, we are interested in every form of Vaishnavism, but especially attracted to this dispensation called Gaudiya Vaishnavism. So what's the meaning of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, just since we are speaking a little bit about this? Someone may present the argument that Gaudiya, the term Gaudiya comes from Gauda Mandal. So it's kind of a geographical delimitation of a transcendental idea. So it's like saying, I'm practicing, what's the name of this area? Turku? Something from Turku, what is Turkwan? Turkish not. How do you call?
Turkish Christianity?
Yeah, that's my point. Yeah. I'm practicing Finnish Christianity or Argentinian Islam. And say, no, it doesn't work like that. I mean, it sounds like an oxymoron, because one ideal speaks about universal and God and this, and the other one is, and Gaudiya. Gaudiya means like, it seems like really delimiting, because you are going to a very particular village in Bengal. And in connection to that, you speak about Vishnu, which means he who is everywhere, but he's limited to this village. So how to make this fit? So actually our acharyas had made another connection regarding this idea of Gaudiya. We have to deal with the root, Bengali root, and Prabhupada will assist me in this. Gur, the concept of gur. How to translate gur in English? Molasses. So gur, you have, I mean, Bengali is the land of sugar cane and lots of sweetness is there, even on that platform. But of course, for us, the sweetness has to do with something else, with that which Mahaprabhu came to taste, the madhurya that he's all about, and that eventually becomes his audarya, his distribution. So this Gaudiya Vaishnavism has to do with gur-like Vaishnavism, molasses-like Vaishnavism, sweet madhurya-like Vaishnavism. It's a type of Vaishnavism in which the element of madhurya or sweetness is particularly emphasized, extremely emphasized, I would say. We'll say that's really one of the main contributions of the Goswamis, is this emphasis on madhurya. And even madhurya not only limited to the realm of romantic love, but madhurya as the very ideal of whole Braj. Whole Braj being the land of madhurya from tip to toe, if you will. And as we spoke today in the morning, or yesterday, I no longer too many classes these days, how this madhurya is not to be equal to ordinary madhurya, and how Aishwarya is to be totally present to facilitate the ultimate experience of madhurya. So this is what Mahaprabhu is about. Krishna in the search of a particular type of madhurya, which give rise to a particular overflowing in him, which we call audarya. So audarya means the overflowing of madhurya in Sri Chaitanya Dev. And the Goswamis assisting him and assisting us in how we can take advantage of such an overwhelming, again, waterfall. So a real Gaudiya Vaishnava, it's not so much someone who lives in Gauda. I mean, you can be there, no problem, it's nice. Mathura Bas, but who lives for Gauda, who lives for the ideal of sweetness, and who lives for such sweetness that is associated with the love of Braj. And again, as my Guru Maharaj will say, if you really understand the love of Raj, naturally you will converge into this lotus inside the lotus called Nadia or Navadvip, the natural extension of Raj. That's what the Goswamis did in their writings, interestingly. They presented through Parokshabad, if you will, Gaur Lila. Overtly, they were not speaking about Gaur Lila too much, a little bit here and there. But indirectly, it was all about Gaur Lila, we could say. All about Gaur Lila. Because you get to know Krishna in such a way that he cannot but be Gaur. He cannot but become that particular manifestation. So this is the idea of Gaudiya and Vaishnavism. Vaishnavism, of course, generally is associated with the idea of Vishnu. And for us, Gaudiyas, we are biased to see the name Vishnu first as the name of Krishna, and then as the name of who popularly is known as Vishnu. But in one sense, Vaishnavism is especially connected with the Vaishnava, even. That's another important contribution of our school and of the Goswamis. Vaishnava above Vishnu, basically. The worship of Vaishnava is about the worship of God himself, which may sound like a little bit shocking for some. Because our teaching is love of God is Krishna is not the goal of life. Sorry to tell. But the goal of life is
love of Krishna.
Thank you so much. So love of Krishna. We don't want Krishna without love of Krishna. That may be like a who knows what, uncomfortable moment. No? Srila Maharaj will say that if Krishna one day appears in front of me, I will tell him, wait 1 minute, that I will ask my Guru Maharaj if you are the person he has been speaking about all this time to me. Like implying, I will only relate to you through my Guru, which implies I will only go through you through embodiment of bhakti, through bhakti. So Krishna himself is saying this, and great personality say this, Aradhananam Vishnu. How is Aradhananam Sarvisham Vishnu Aradhanam Param. Tasmat Parataram Devita Diyanam Samarchanam. So Mahadev says this. Of all the types of worship, the highest type of worship is that of Vishnu. So we may say, okay, then that's what Vaishnavism is about. Mahadev say, no. I have not yet presented the full picture of Vaishnavism. Yeah, worship of Vishnu, but on top of worship of Vishnu, Tadiyanam Samarchanam. To worship Tadiya, Seva, to render pleasurable, favorable service to those who are dear to Vishnu. It's even higher than worship of Vishnu. Interestingly. Mahaprabhu himself said this to Advaita Acharya. Someone who worships me but is not worshiping my devotees basically is cutting my body in pieces. That's a strong way of putting it. But the idea is the same. I mean, we don't want Krishna without bhakti. I mean, Prabhupada will say, if you love me, you love my dog, basically. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur is praying in Saranagati, I'm the dog of the Vaishnava. So we have to love Frodo. Conclusion. One of the conclusions. So for us, the point for us is the associates of Bhagavan are more important for us than Bhagavan because they personify a type of love that eventually will become the goal of our life. I mean, the goal of our life is, as we mentioned, which? That's a generic description. Yeah. Still generic.
A specific type of love.
So eventually we will reach to some very specific answer. No? We will feel, okay, the goal of my life is this particular portal. And there will be a corresponding person that will, in eternity, embody that type of love. As we mentioned, Raga Atmika. So those personalities are for us more important than Krishna himself, actually. Our daily dynamics, even in the spiritual world, will mostly involved with those agents, those personifications of love. And all that will reach Krishna in the best possible ways, Sri Radha, Govinda, and so on. So interestingly, the Goswamis, I mean, with full humility, but one of their contributions was to give themselves to us as the personifications of love that we want to attain ultimately also. Of course, they are not saying like that. It's not the Rupa Goswamis coming and saying, I'm giving myself at the highest prospect for those who are attracted to Manjari Bhav, so here I am. But at the same time, that's the conclusion. So that's one of their contributions. Again, they themselves are the contribution, all that they represent. So this is a very unique idea, again, that is not generally found in any other place of the religious world. This notion of something above God. And the specifics of that, the personifications of love of God, and how there is a whole discipline to imbibe the particular mood of that particular personality, and eventually find ourselves in our ultimate identity there. So again, we are not so much interested in Krishna, we are interested in Krishna Bhakti, in Krishna Prem. And this Krishna Prem is so interesting, not only for us, but for Mahaprabhu, for Krishna himself. This is interesting. That's an interesting thing. Love for Krishna is the goal. For us, that's our prayojan, Prem prayojan. But for Krishna himself, he has his own prayojan also. I mean, it's not that he doesn't have prayojan. From a different side, of course, he's not a conditioned soul that has to reach there or something. But nonetheless, there's a goal in life. There's an ideal that one is constantly after. So Mahaprabhu is that idea. Mahaprabhu is Krishna tasting, trying to attain love of God. So that's one devotee says. Sometimes we are so much concerned trying to expand our Purusha Bhava and get as closer as we can to what must it feel being God. But God himself is telling you, you understood everything wrong. No, I'm as Mahaprabhu, I'm trying to stop being God and being a devotee. I want to try Prakriti Bhava. What does it feel to be on the Shakti side of the equation? And all of you Shakti people down there are so mad trying to be Purusha. I'm Purusha and it's not working, he said. I'm Purusha Tam. What does be a Purusha? But I would like to see what does it feel to be a Vaishnava. So that's an important lesson for us sadhakas, to really value the opportunity of being a devotee instead of trying to rule over whatever. So, so in this Gaur Lila, Bhagavan himself, Krishna, becomes, more conscious of himself. Krishna becomes more Krishna conscious as Mahaprabhu. That's why he's called Krishna Chaitanya. So Guru Maharaj will say, Krishna Chaitanya means Krishna consciousness. Srila Prabhupada named his society inspired by this conception, Krishna consciousness. So who is Krishna consciousness? Who is the topmost epitome of Krishna consciousness? That's Sri Radha. So Krishna himself wants to experience what she is experiencing, how she is seeing him. So it's Krishna, Mahaprabhu is Krishna trying to be Krishna conscious through the eyes, through the prem, through the Bhava of Sri Radha. So in this way, he's like highlighting the greatness of the devotees. How important is to see Krishna himself, his obsession as Mahaprabhu, seeing himself through the eye of the devotee. That's one of the three main desires that takes him to come. What is those things that Sri Radha is finding in me? As my Guru Maharaj will say, Krishna himself knows I'm special. There is something special about me, what to do. But I cannot fathom the speciality. How to say? Vaishishta and myself. So because I see that Sri Radha is seeing in me something, but so that makes me conclude there is something. Me, I'm something, I'm someone, but what is that? She's experiencing such chamatkar. Chamatkar, to say, it's the essence of the experience of rasa. Rasa sar chamatkar. They say like chamatkar means like astonishment, right? In English, astonishment. They say the essence of the experience of rasa is astonishment. So you can tell by that. And Srila Semaras will say many times that rasa is the thermometer to measure what highest or lower in the realm of ecstatic realm. The more rasa, the highest the conception, if you will. And if there is rasa, there has to be chamatkar, astonishment. So in Mahaprabhu, we find that Krishna being totally astonished by Radha Bhav, wanted to taste that, and when tasting that, becoming much more astonished. So again, going back to the Goswamis, sorry that I'm going too much to Mahaprabhu, but it's never too much. And again, going to the Goswami means going to Sri Chaitanya Dev. One is not separate from the other. So Mahaprabhu's experience, ecstatic character, like this famous Christian, who is his name? John Moffat? Oh, no? Okay, John Moffat. He mentioned that all these symptoms that we heard about, for example, from Christ, speaking about love of God, all the things that one is expected to experience if one is to be in love of God and so on, all those things and more are found like nobody else in the figure of Sri Chaitanya, he said. He personifies better than anyone else what Christ was speaking about or something like this. So the point is that Mahaprabhu's like devotional character somehow sometimes eclipsed his teaching or his philosophy. Eclipsed in the sense that he was such, again, an ecstatic volcano. Sometimes he didn't need to say anything, basically, also, as we know, as we will share today also. And sometimes he just converted people by Mauna Brata. How did he convert the greatest logician and pandit of whole India? Mauna Brata. Try to imagine. You're invited to a debate with the greatest intellectual of the time, I don't know, whatever. Perhaps to defeat Jordan Peterson in 7 days. And you just sit and do like Mauna Brata. And after 1 week, he's rolling on the ground and crying. So that was Mahaprabhu's power, achar. No? His example was such that sometimes he didn't need to say too much because his tears spoke for himself, if you will, or something like that. So his achar was such that sometimes prachar is not necessary. Like a friend of mine said the other day, like if you take the word achar outside of prachar, achar means conduct, personal conduct, and prachar means, sometimes we translate this, preaching. If you take the word achar from prachar, because one is included in the other, you only have P and R, which is personal, public relationships. So that's an interesting idea. We don't want that. So the point is that the Goswamis, since Mahaprabhu, his own example, somehow may have eclipsed his own teaching, the Goswamis made very clear which was the teachings of Sri Chaitanya Dev, what they received from him. They put this in their books very, very clearly. So again, the Goswamis spoke and wrote about more about the teachings of Sri Chaitanya than about Sri Chaitanya himself. But this is an important point also. I mean, if you write about the teachings of someone and you are really walking the talk, those teachings will just throw you to that someone. Even though if you don't say too much about the someone, the teachings in themselves come from that someone and point to that someone, basically. So they wrote in such a way that we may conclude about the necessity of Gaur, of Mahaprabhu in our lives. So here we are trying to increase our sense of necessity in connection to Sri Chaitanya Dev. And today, in connection to all this, I would like to concentrate a little bit on Sri Gopal Bhatta Goswami, with your permission, because we are to speak about the contributions of each one of the 6 Goswamis as a group or as individuals. And since today is the Tirobhav Mahotsav, great celebration of his passing away, it's important it's classical in our tradition to share some words, especially on the disappearance day. That's especially celebrated among Gaudiyas. Prabhupada was singing also Janila Prema Dana. So on this type of songs point to the entrance through separation to the realm of union, basically. We are to unite with these personalities again. They are like the example to follow in eternity, but how to reach them? Our tradition always points this idea of separation is the entry point. You have to advance feeling separation. And of course, this has to be understood. We are not promoting masochism and just cry and go to some drama school nearby and learn to cry for Krishna. Now, our Acharya say learn to cry for Krishna, and doesn't mean become a good actor, but really cry for Krishna. And this is not a joke. This is not something we can force. No, and cry doesn't necessarily mean some water will be rolling here. No, I mean, the movement will be always first and foremost inside. So let's hear some words of Sri Gopal Bhatta Goswami. He's one of the first Goswami that met Mahaprabhu. I would say the second one after Das Goswami, Raghunath Das Goswami. And there's not too much information about him in comparison with the other, almost the other. Well, the Raghunath Bhatta Goswami is even more unknown, we will say, but Gopal Bhatta, the two Bhattas are the conspicuous by their absence or something. So it is said that Gopal Bhatta Goswami, he asked, for example, to Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, this, I don't know how much confirmed this is, but you practically do not find anything about him in Chaitanya Charitamrita. And you find considerably much more on Raghunath Das Goswami, Rupa, Sanatan. But it is said that Gopal Bhatta Goswami asked Krishnadas Kaviraj, do not mention me in your book, please. No? And Krishnadas Kaviraj went to ask for blessings to him, to say, I give you blessings, but we have to sign some contract here. You have my blessings, but my blessings do not put my name there. I don't want to be there. I mean, it's not because he didn't like the book or something, but I mean, we have to understand this. There are different ways that the Vaishnava will show humility, and we shouldn't conclude, okay, so if so the ones who appeared were totally puffed up and they wanted to promote themselves, or nothing like that. So each one from their own perspective of humility were inspired to be there, not be there for whatever reason. So it is said that Sri Gopal Bhatta was born in South India, in a Brahmin, very prestigious Brahmin family of priests from the Sri Rangam temple of the Ramanuja Sri Sampradaya. He was the son of the famous Venkata Bhatta, who was the main pujari of the temple at the time. And he met Mahaprabhu when he was 7 years old. You can imagine, that's interesting samskar. 7 years, I met Mahaprabhu. He stayed at home for Chaturmasya. I didn't meet him like around the corner, but 4 months at home. So that was a very, very important moment for him, for sure. All his family was converted basically in one. It's not that much confirmed how much Venkatavata was converted, if he was converted to the same degree like Prabodhananda Saraswati, he really was converted, if you really rather access to the need and so on. So it is said that Gopal Bhatta, before meeting Mahaprabhu in South India, he received darshan of Mahaprabhu in a dream. Mahaprabhu showed to him all his nowadays pastimes in a dream. So when he awoke, he received Mahaprabhu at home, like a sannyasi already, outside of Navadvip. And Gopal Bhatta's guru was his uncle, it is said, Prabodhananda Saraswati. And as we know, he witnessed a very intense presence of Mahaprabhu in his house, especially this famous interaction Mahaprabhu had with Venkatavata in the context of converting him to one degree or another. You may know the story, but with your permission, I will repeat it one more time, because that's connected to one of the main contributions of the Goswamis, which is the Krishna conception above the notion of Narayan, which at that time was really prevalent. Along with Advaita Vedanta, you had this notion of Vishnu is God and Krishna is but an avatar of Bhagavan Narayana. And so the Goswamis made this unique emphasis and contribution in another direction. And Mahaprabhu entered with this point while visiting Venkatavat, and he asked him, okay, so you are Sri Vaishnava? Om Namo Narayana. So Shastra mentions that Srimati Lakshmi, who is the very form of chastity, if there's a chaste lady well known around creation, that's Lakshmi. So she's well known for never leaving Narayan, even for a moment, always remaining at her feet, massaging him. But we have find a very unique idea in Shastra, which mentions that Sri Lakshmi, at one point, she wanted to join Krishna in Rasa Lila. So Mahaprabhu said, how is that possible? So joking, like in a jolly, you say? Mm-hmm. Like in a jolly mood, he was like, remember, he converted Sarvabhauma just by Mauna Brata 1 week. Now it's the conversion of Venkata just by jolliness, or whatever the word it is. No? So Lakshmi went to Krishna. How? I mean, that doesn't sound too chaste. No? And we know that Krishna for sure won't be waiting for Lakshmi alone. No? So he always has some harem of other ladies. So what happened with Lakshmi at this point? Where her chastity has gone? Like joking with Venkatavat, pinching, Siddhantic pinching. But Venkatavat understood the point, and he said, no, there's no problem. There's no transgression in her chastity whatsoever, because among Narayana and Krishna, no difference. In Tattva, there are one. Metaphysical truth, we are speaking about the same person, but they represent a different emotional phase, if you will. So Lakshmi just went to Narayan in one of his avatars, Krishna. So no problem. And then Mahaprabhu went to the second question, which was kind of, the question in itself was overwhelming for Venkatavat. He said, so if it's the same person, there should be no problem. All facilities should be there. But did he say that Lakshmi never was able to join Krishna in the Rasa Lila? Till today, she's in Belvan, one of these 12 forests in Braj, trying to enter with no avail. To no avail. So at that point, Venkatavata was like saying, like, only someone who makes such a question is the one who can reply to that question. Say, I don't know what to say here. So then it's when Mahaprabhu established the uniqueness of Bhagavan Sri Krishna. I'm mentioning, of course, Srimati Lakshmi Devi was not able to join Krishna because, in the words of my Guru Maharaj, he says that Krishna saw Lakshmi executing deep, intense tapasya, and he asked Lakshmi, what are you doing, Lakshmi? Imagine, Lakshmi is like the royal lady par excellence. I mean, like silk sari, bangles, golden bangles, precious gems, Aishwarya personified. I mean, she's the Aishwarya lady among all. And she was in one forest under a tree in Vrindavan with one like old like cloth like the ones I have here with holes, and eating some roots from the forest and extreme severity and tapasya. She was like really thin. So I mean, it's like seeing like the Queen of England entering into one island here in Finland and just like, you say, what are you doing here? And Lakshmi say, well, I want to enter Rasa Lila. But Krishna say, that's not the Abhideya. That's not the means for accessing such a stage. And then Lakshmi asked, which is the way? And Krishna said, my Guru Maharaj will say, well, first of all, you have to leave Narayana, which is already enough for Lakshmi, too much. But that was only the beginning of the whole method, Raganuga Bhakti. First, you leave your husband, Lakshmi, Pati, Narayan, and then you have to enter Braj, and you have to marry one Gopa there. After first leaving Narayan in Vaikuntha. So Krishna was pinching Lakshmi. First live Narayan in Vaikuntha and marry one Gopa in Vrindavan. And then you have to leave that second husband and come to me in Parakiya. So at this point, Lakshmi already collapsed on the floor. No? I was like, no, I cannot do that. She has an abhiman, no? A sense of being, an ego, if you will, in a good sense of the term, an identity. And it's okay for her to be attached to the Lakshmi. It's not a problem. It's an eternal sense of being. But the point is, she was not ready to pay the price for treading the path of Raga Bhajan, which implies following the footsteps of the Brajavasis and leaving everything behind, family included, husband included, social considerations included. Sammaho charanare sammaham sambrindavan kimapi golam sarvadharmam parityaja. That's the ultimate meaning of that verse in the Gita. Sarvadharmam parityaja mamekam saranam. Transgress everything, come to me in Braj, Krishna said. The flute call, Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta will say. This verse of the famous verse of the Gita is the flute call of Krishna. So when the flute sounds, no more considerations about anything else. Sometimes it is say, but the gopis hear the flute, and when they run after the flute, how did they manage to? I mean, why? When Krishna was telling them eventually, in the Rasa Lila, you should go back home. It's too late. Young ladies, you are too many. I'm just one boy here. What people will think of me? Huh? This doesn't seem like a too much dharmic stage. So you should go back. Of course, the Sanskrit lends itself to be interpreted in that section as Krishna is saying exactly the opposite at the same time. There's nothing else you have to do apart from being here with me. So the commentators say, well, the gopis at this point, Krishna is saying, go back to your homes, but the gopis were in total self-forgetfulness. So they were not even aware of themselves. What to speak, being aware of they have homes and the address and boiling milk in the stove and baby, crying baby and husband. And they were all forgotten of themselves. So what to speak of all the other extensions of ego, basically. So in this way, this going back to the past, when Mahaprabhu kind of makes Venkatavata collapse, he establishes this notion of Krishna as being above Narayana, which is a very Gaudiya idea. And we have to be, of course, very mature in dealing with that. And if you meet a Sri Vaishnava, please do not try to convince him and ask the same question. Lakshmi says in the Shastra, see what to do. It's a beautiful thing to honor at the same time. Mahaprabhu himself honored different bhavas when he met them. It's not that he was converting each and every person to Gaudiya Vedanta. So this is a very important contribution of the Goswamis. Mahaprabhu is doing this now, but the Goswamis will systematize this idea of Krishna above Narayana. For example, Rupa Goswami, his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, he will mention different qualities that you find in all living beings, which are like 50 if I'm not mistaken, 55. There are some others that are only found in certain great personalities, like Shiva and so on. There are some others that you find only in Narayana. And there are some others that you won't find even in Narayana, which again is like, for the theological world of the time, was like, what? Narayana is missing something? He'll say there are 4 Madhuryas that are not there in Narayana. Lila Madhurya, Venu Madhurya, Rupa Madhurya, and Prema Madhurya. Only pertain to Krishna and Braj. He's surrounded by a unique, sweet type of love, associates, form, and flute. With all respect to Narayan, but he doesn't have a flute. So there is some added features there that Rupa Goswami is trying to establish there. So there is a particular focus, basically, what we are saying here, that the Goswamis are making in their scripture. For example, when you take a picture, sometimes you take a picture of a forest, but the forest is mostly there to give context. But the focus of the picture maybe is in one flower in the whole forest. The focus is the flower, but the whole forest is also necessary for that. So in the same way, Sampradaya means that. Sampradaya is a school of thought that is in a healthy way obsessed in a particular direction, particular flower in the forest of theological possibilities, if you will. No? Let's pick this one flower. Or there's place for more than one flower, of course, not only one, but there's a particular section of the garden we are interested in. And the whole rest of the forest is putting a flower in context. I mean, we are not, as we always say, a text without a context becomes a pretext. So context is crucial always and always and always again. But this sampradaya, this parampara, a particular flower, a particular portal that is inviting us into a particular entrance and level of penetration into transcendence and find ourselves there for eternity. So again, Goswamis are totally instrumental for this in our lives. So going back for a minute to Gopal Bhatta Goswami and his story, some more little ideas. After visiting for 4 months, you remember, I mean, Gopal Bhatta was 7 years that he wanted to just run with Mahaprabhu. That was the standard. Sannyasi came and he didn't ask Gopal Bhatta a donation in this case. Sometimes that happened, you know, Chaturmasya comes and sannyasis are staying in one place for 4 months. Maybe they send the kids somewhere else because maybe in 4 months the sannyasi goes, oh, this kid is nice. We can take him for the rest of forever with me. So in the case of Gopal Bhatta, Mahaprabhu say, no, you better stay with your parents. They are relatively old. So accompany them, serve them, they're Vaishnavas. Not only your parents, they're Vaishnavas. And whenever they pass away, you can join me. And in the context of all this, of course, we know he also was sent to the Gandaki River in Nepal to Mahaprabhu himself recommended go there and find Shalagram. Shalagram still is there and so on. So this is a long story with Shalagram and what happened there. But in the midst of that, eventually the parents of Gopal Bhatta pass away. And he, sorry, and he joins Rupa and Sanatan Goswamis in Vrindavan. And it is said that when he's in Vrindavan, when Rupa and Sanatan, Mahaprabhu is sending to Gopal Bhatta his asana and his loincloth, his kopin. So generally, the symbol of this is the asana means is to be taken as Gopal Bhatta Goswami is pointed by Mahaprabhu as the official or main Diksha Guru among the Goswamis. And in this moment, we start to see how each Goswami is specialized in one direction or another. For example, not all of them accept the disciples. I mean, almost none of them accept the disciples, basically. With the exception of Gopal Bhatta. So Gopal Bhatta Goswami was the Diksha Guru among the Goswamis. And interestingly, Mahaprabhu chose him. Of course, he was totally qualified, but we could say all of the other Goswamis were totally qualified for that also. It's not that he was more qualified. Sometimes relative considerations are behind certain decisions like this. Sometimes we may think only the one who is more qualified will be the guru. And there is some truth to that. Of course, I'm not saying just let anyone initiate people. It doesn't work like that. But sometimes among totally qualified people like the Goswamis, one of them will be picked as the guru, the Diksha Guru, but mostly because of a relative consideration in this case, in the service of the absolute consideration. Which was the relative consideration? Birth. Gopal Bhatta Goswami was born as a Karnatak Brahman. Karnatak? Okay, South Indian Brahman. So really prestigious background, Sri Sampradaya, and very, socially speaking, like really impressive background. So, and at that time, Guru ideally is to be a Brahmin, and certain social sensibilities were there. So Mahaprabhu considered better Gopal Bhatta Goswami. So he's a Guru. He has a good background. I mean, all the other ones are exceptionally qualified, but some of them were not born as Brahmins. Some of them, socially speaking, lose their Brahminhood by associating with Muslims like Rupa and Sanatana by working in the Muslim government and so on. So again, it's a relative consideration. It's about what the society thinks at the time, but all these relative details are also important when establishing a sampradaya. Remember, all this has to do with the establishment of the sampradaya. Still, the Gaudiya sampradaya was not, how to say, officially the Gaudiya sampradaya as such. It was just in the process of gestation period, if you will. No? So the books are being written, the guru is being established. So lots of considerations, and there are many of them, maybe just Varna ashram-like considerations. For us, it may be difficult to conceive because we are not born in a Varna ashram society. So it's difficult to imagine how much ingrained that still is, as we were speaking the other day with Brigopad, what to speak 500 years back. That was really interesting consideration why Gopal Bhatta was chosen for this. And of course, he wrote some books, although mostly some commentaries, no, for Bilba Mangala Thakur's Krishna Karnamrita. Which other commentary?
On one book about Rasamanjari.
Yeah, but there was another one. Apart from Krishna Karnamrita?
It's that one.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then one book about time for rituals, Kala Kaumari.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what's Prabhupada's opinion of Kriya Saradipika?
Not decided.
Okay.
Definitely the one that Bhaktivinoda published.
Yeah.
At least it has some additions.
Mm-hmm.
There's, for example, how to make oblations, like Gopala Bhattaya Swaha.
Mm-hmm.
So probably Gopala Bhatta wouldn't write in his book that offered to me.
Especially him,
Yeah.
who is totally anonymous everywhere. Uh-huh.
Also to Mayapur Yoga Pita.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
But I haven't looked at any old manuscripts, so maybe it's just some parts are added and the rest is old. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yet to be done.
Okay. And also some yet to be determined notions in connection with, but most probably that's the overall conclusion that he wrote, that initial notes on which Srila Jiva Goswami based for developing his Sandarbhas, which was also important contribution. And again, as we will see these days, most probably sometimes some other Goswamis are not officially included in the books of the others, but we have this notion that they were really writing a lot together also, so exchanging ideas and thoughts. So it's a point that you cannot really draw a line. This was only written by Sanatana Goswami. There's no influence of the other ones. So that's a very interesting peer review that they have among themselves, no? in the writing of the books. And of course, if there is something that Gopal Bhatta Goswami is well known for, is his famous deity Shri Radha Raman. I won't tell the story in detail. We were celebrating that the day after Nrsimha Chaturdasi, but it's special because it came as a self-manifest deity from his Damodar Shila, manifested in this way when, interestingly, North Carolina, we spoke about that. Gopal Bhatta was meditating on how Nrsimhadev appeared from a stone pillar because of Prahlad's bhakti. So Gopal Bhatta was saying, well, you appear, Bhagavan, from the stone because of the bhakti of Prahlad. I have here these 12 stones. Why you want to appear to me as well? I want, because he had the desire of worshipping Bhagavan with form, if you will. No? Particularly, he wanted to worship Sri Radha Govinda Mahaprabhu. Mahaprabhu himself told him, I will give you my darshan one more time. And at this time, Mahaprabhu already passed away from the world. So Gopal Bhatta was afflicted, thinking, I didn't have the darshan finally. So as we know, he lamented and was absorbed in Prahlad's bhakti. And the result of his absorption in Prahlad's Shanta Bhakti was the manifestation of Radha Raman in the context of his Manjari Bhava in his inner world. So,
Well,
yeah.
Is this a story started with the offering from the king, or this?
Well, sometimes there is this. I have heard different varieties of the stories, and one of them is that he received some clothes from the king for dressing the deities, but it's clothes for human form deities, if you will. So, but sometimes I heard other versions without that part, but it's acceptable masala to add to the story, no problem. Like he really wanted to worship Bhagavan in Nara form, human-like form, and he had the shalagrams. And one of these shalagrams, again, the end result is one of the 12. He woke up one day and on the basket he was carrying them, he saw Radha Ramanju there, which is Radha Krishna combined. That means Mahaprabhu. I would say almost the main deity in Vrindavan for Gaudiya, we could say. Self-manifest, never left Vrindavan, and so many other things. So this Gopal Bhatta Goswami, he's also considering his Siddha form, I think in Braj, sometimes described as Guna Manjari, but also interestingly it's connected with Ananga Manjari, who is Sri Radha's younger sister. And of course, it's also the Shakti expression of Sri Balaram, who Balaram is the source of Guru Tattva. And Gopal Bhatta is the main guru of the Goswami, so some connection could be made also there in that sense. So some ideas we want to share today regarding the Goswamis in general, a little bit introductory, but then Sri Gopal Bhatta in his Tirubhak Mahotsav. So we have some few minutes. I won't extend that much, but I don't know if anyone has some question or some comments, something you would like to ask or to share.
We were talking about the etymology of Gaudiya rooted to Gur.
Mm-hmm.
I also heard this mentioned that, I don't know if this is like an etymological or just like a rasic explanation, that it is also rooted in Gauri, because as Gauriyas we put emphasis on Gauri or Radharani in the scale of putting focus on Shri Krishna. So I don't know if that's like is it just that's like a rasic explanation, or if there's some etymology also there?
Here we have the Bengali expert on Sanskrit with us, but I would feel it's more like a rasic one. And I would say that the other one that I mentioned is also a rasic one.
Yeah. Neither is really very
Uh-huh.
very accurate, but especially this one with Gauri, because it's different letters. Gauriya, and the other one is Gauriya. Sounds a little bit similar, but it's actually two different letters.
Yeah, the two are rasic interpretation, basically. Something else? I'm intrigued what he's reading. Now comes the second lecture. Okay. Srila Gopal Bhatta Goswami Tirubhak Mahotsav ki jai. Srila Gurudev ki jai. Shri Hari Nam Sankirtan ki jai. Shri Mahaprabhu ki jai. Shri Rupa Sanatana Bhatta Raghunath Jiva Gopal Bhatta Das Raghunath Sat Goswami Prabhu ki jai. Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Gaur Preman. Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyaiva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Gaur Hari Bol.